Coming up on the ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, State Senator John Laird is here to talk about legislative priorities, attendance rates, independent study, and cost of living adjustments.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
And we're just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you here with us on a Wednesday. Go ahead and jump onto the chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, you and I are kicking off our number 7 of broadcast this week. I hope you stretched a little bit. Welcome. Hope you're well.
Are we officially tired of each other yet, or not yet? Or we're going to string this out another 30 minutes, right?
I think you and I can put up with each other for another 30 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Susan Denton, our very first viewer on the chat. Laura Dutch, good to see you. Mark Campbell over in Region 7. Beth Bray, Neri Pais, so good to have you guys on the show. We're going to go ahead and move your news headlines over to the back end of the show. And we'll talk about legislative action days and what kind of programming you still have an opportunity to see. But we want to go ahead and bring on our guest right here off the top. State Senator John Laird from Senate District 17 is with us. He is also our 2022 ACSA Friend of Public Education Award winner. Senator Laird, it is so good to see you. Edgar and I had the opportunity, along with Jack O'Connell, to see you at the Mid-State Conference a few weeks ago. We appreciate that you didn't get tired of us back then and that you've joined us. It's an honor to have you, sir. How are you?
It's my pleasure to be here.
Senator, I just have to add, because, you know, what in regular years, and I guess we should all just start using the word regular or normal right now, because, you know, we were continuing to adapt. But as those folks know, every year we typically award a Friend of Education Award, and this is an award voted on by our regional leaders, and there's nominations made from around the state. And this year, Senator Laird was a very worthy recipient, and I think it's really a testament to you helping, one, being a terrific ear to the field. I mean, one of the things that we've commented on over and over again, not just from your folks in your region, because your constituents always tout how you come in already knowing the issues before they've even had a chance to. I know we were talking backstage how you've met with our folks a number of times over the last number of months, and that's a good sign, because that means that those relationships have been built, that you've been a welcoming voice to them, but also not just the access, but some of the policy priorities. And you've been one of the strongest voices in the legislature around really being mindful of what's the state role at a time that, you know, has been challenging for our school leaders, that they've had a lot to contend with. So for that reason, it was a unanimous vote. So just thank you for your leadership. Thank you for everything you've done for schools. And just to prove that we're not
there
kidding,
it is.
you actually got the award there. So.
And in a normal year, you would be giving it to me in person. So
yes,
thank you.
That is true. That is true. Senator Laird, thank you again so much for joining us. And folks, if you do have any questions for Senator Laird, go ahead and put those into the comment section. Senator Laird is heading over to the Capitol in exactly 16 minutes. So you have a very brief amount of time to talk with the senator. Senator, let me just ask you right off the top, what are your legislative priorities this year?
Well, we have such an unusual year with the budget. And I was budget chair in the assembly from 2004 to 2008, and we were doing triage. We were trying to just protect what we had. And this is the second year in a row that we are tens of billions of dollars over projection. And in Prop 98, it is roughly $20 billion, although a few billion gets scraped off for the rainy day fund, which is kicked in for Prop 98. And then we have sort of a split between ongoing and one time. So my real priority is with the ongoing funds, trying to increase the base funding as a start. And then we have issues with facilities, which are in general that we need. There hasn't been the bond we've wanted recently. And with the pre-K and TK, there are staffing and facilities issues. So it's really trying to use what we have to address the basic funding formula and funding into it, and try to deal with facilities. And then there's a whole host of other things, and a lot of it is a balance between the one time and the ongoing.
Senator, one of the things that you've been great on this issue, acknowledging some of the challenges, is attendance. That was one of the things, one of the pieces we were talking about, that attendance rates have been incredibly volatile. And I think this was epitomized probably at no other time greater than in January, given what folks were dealing with in terms of the Omicron variant. So I know this is something that your committee has been talking about. What do you foresee in terms of relief for school districts, and as it relates to attendance that affects their funding?
Well, I think that the governor has made this proposal to have a rolling average for 3 years. And if any district has a single year that's higher than the rolling average, choosing to use that year. And that's very important, because you talked about me going out to districts, and I think it was 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, I went out to see the Pacific School in Davenport, and they have a program that has received statewide notoriety about nutrition. And I ate lunch there. And then I met with 4 small school superintendents, and each one had an issue. I mean, one had 27% of the students living in houses that had been burned out at the fire the year before last. And another was basic aid and was grappling with pre-K and TK. Another small school district that had to have a special election and took up a disproportionate share of their budget. But then the Pacific School in Davenport had an increase due to fire and some other things, and it wasn't reflected in the formula. And while it was small numerically compared to other districts, it was big percentage-wise. And so there are all these things that factor in. It's making sure there's flexibility for people to deal with their situation. And even though the governor has done this extra year and everybody's excited that next year will be covered, it's still in an era of general declining enrollment and a general issue of some people not coming back from COVID. Leaves us with this cliff that just it puts off a further year. But in this year, I tried to engage the stakeholders to start to talk about it. So do we wait till our hair's on fire next year, or do we try to look at it and see what there is that we can do now to try to work toward it? And I'm not talking about cuts, but I'm talking about being ready for the fact that it's going to be different whenever it gets to normal, as Edgar referred to earlier.
Again, want to remind you folks, if you have questions for Senator Laird, go ahead and put those into the comment section. Ellen, we see your question, and Gary, yours as well. We'll try and address those in just a moment. Senator, the changes made to independent study have made the program difficult, to offer and manage during this time. Now, with a potential vaccine mandate coming, the program may need to be utilized by even more students. Beyond the changes that the governor is proposing, will the legislature ease some of the restrictions on independent study? Do you see it happening?
We're talking about it. And to back up, and I apologize for people that have heard me say this before, but there was a real move last year not to offer any alternative, but to come back mandatorily. And we really fought for an alternative. This is the alternative that was put forward. It might not have been my first choice, but at least we had an alternative. And then because school districts were losing for people that were quarantining and maybe studying at home during the quarantine, there were certain tweaks we did before we went out of session at the end of the summer. And I am hoping we look at it, because I'm not sure it works for everybody, and I'm not sure that some of the requirements aren't too stringent. And so the one problem has been that every time we craft something, the pandemic changes. It's when the governor made his proposal a year ago for reopening schools. It was when there was a surge and there was color coding. And then by the time we came to a deal, the surge had passed and we were looking at enabling rather than forcing. And then by the time we really got to it, the color coding went away. And then we thought we're good. And another surge happened. And so the real thing is that as much as we can plan, we sort of have to ride with what the events are on this. And I think that we would like to have more flexibility, but we'll take a look when we get to the second half of May and try to make sure that the pandemic is where we think it is. And then we'll know whether or not we're safe to do that.
Senator, we got a question which I think you've heard from your constituents on this issue, and I think it was Ellen Wheeler who pointed out that she welcomes universal transitional kindergarten as a new requirement, and I think that's a sentiment we hear across the state. It's good for kids, whatnot. There has been some concern, which we've heard, and I think you've heard from community-funded districts about that they didn't get specific funding for this. And she asked pretty directly here, she took the opportunity to ask a question to the senator, do you support funding for that purpose? Or what's your perspective on this issue of trying to give some resources to community-funded districts or basic aid districts, specifically for UTK?
I tend to support it. And there's a strong advocate for this in Senator Monique Limon. She has gotten out there on this issue. She talked about it at our caucus. And I have talked about it. And I think the only hitch is just that not all basic aid districts are the same. Just as the one I mentioned earlier in the conversation, that's really small, the principal superintendent told me they might have 5 or 6 students. She would have to staff it herself. They might have to have 1 full staff member. It wouldn't be funded, and they're already skating on the edge. That's a real issue. I also have San Luis Coastal and San Luis Obispo, which is a basic aid district because of Diablo Canyon. And then Diablo Canyon is closing in 3 years, and they're going to have a rough time. And yet they're supposed to start it without any money and handle it. And there are probably a few districts that are so over it in revenue. It's like, I will have a hard time with colleagues saying, why do we help them? But we have to help, because some are just over the level. There are people that need that. So some of us are going to work toward it, and we're just going to see if we can convince our colleagues to get with it.
Senator, I'll just add that I think what you said will be good news to some folks. And I think this acknowledgement that, obviously when we talk about community funded district or basic aids, there's some assumptions made about what those look like. But I think you demonstrated, just how there's variability and diversity, even amongst some of those school districts.
Yeah. And it's, I have Pebble Beach and Carmel and Pacific Grove in my district. And then I have, for a long time, Davenport was basic aid when there was a cement plant open. And the Bonnie Doon district was basic aid because of the Lockheed installation, which is scheduled to close. And then Diablo Canyon moves San Luis Obispo Coastal up. And there's some on those in the Monterey Peninsula that are really off the charts because of the property values and what's there. And there are others that are small. One particular property taxpayer lifts them up. And that's why they're just not all alike.
Senator Gary Reller, who's over in Riverside Unified, asked the question, and I know we always like talking about money, budgets and such. What are the chances of getting funding outside of Prop 98 for facilities? Obviously, with additional classes, with the HVAC systems that were needed during COVID, what about facilities and funding?
I think there's a shot at it. We have other candidates for out of Prop 98 funding because we could choose to address the STRS and PERS buy down from that as well. And there's a question too with how we address the GAN limit, and that's going to cause everybody to glaze over, but it's a ballot measure that was passed, I think, in 1979. And if tax revenues are over a certain level, we have to give it back unless it's for infrastructure, schools, or certain things. And that's in the mix. So it's a question of is that a place to do facilities across state government, including schools, including higher education? We've also looked at a bond. Some of us support putting a school facilities bond on the ballot. The polling isn't quite as good if it includes higher education. Does it make sense to fund some higher education facilities and do a much bigger bond that's through K through 14 and really try to have a better shot at the polls? And then per stirs, if you're going to buy down across state government, it's got to be outside of Prop 98. So we have to look at all those things and decide what are priorities. And as long as I'm on a roll inside Prop 98, I have colleagues that have proposed two things. One has proposed an enrollment system instead of ADA. But if you move to enrollment, it's in the fixed pie. There are winners and losers. My home district where I live is a joint high school, elementary district under one school board. Well, I had a run done of what would happen under enrollment. One of the districts would lose 15%. One would gain 14.5%. You can't cross it money-wise. And so the real thing is it would cost $3.4 billion just to hold harmless those districts that don't gain from enrollment. And there's also potential home to school transportation mandate. Well, that's $3 billion. So we have a lot of things that are out there in play, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So where does pensions fit? Where do facilities fit? Do you do a bond? Do you do an enrollment thing and hold people harmless? Do you do home to school? My first priority is basic, raising the formula at the bottom. And so those are the choices that we are facing heading into the budget.
I appreciate that perspective and just kind of giving that lens about your job, right? You're getting a lot of ask, most of them, coming from our folks or people like us. Your job is to trying to decipher and then, prioritize some of that. But no, we appreciate that perspective.
Well, no, and we had 9 hearings, and now a lot of the asks are coming in after we already had the hearing. And I'm like, I would have liked to have vet that. Doesn't mean we can't still do it, but that would have been a time to really sunshine some of these things.
We got a question from Angela, and this is something you probably heard from some of your constituents. I'll acknowledge, maybe not directly in the realm of you as a legislator, but I think you would have some perspectives. One of the pieces that we hear a lot from our members is that over COVID, so many of the public health mandates were put on them, right? They had the responsibility for COVID testing, for the diagnostics, so you name it, that they really fell on our school administrators. So what can we do as a system to get back to focusing on quality education, on focusing on teaching and learning? What's your perspective from a statewide perspective?
Well, you see, you just said COVID. That just accentuated what was happening already, because teachers are expected to be social workers and public health nurses and truant officers and all these different things. And COVID was laid on it. My perspective that was really hard with this is that it was the public health people making the call, and they should make the call. It shouldn't be politicians legislating it. When we were doing the school reopening, we worked really hard not to legislate the public health. And yet there wasn't clear direction. Sometimes it was put on the locals, and we got to figure out, we've got to do a forensic analysis of what happened during this and how we make sure it doesn't happen the same way the next time. I know I have to go, but I hope we've jammed a lot into the.
We did pretty good for our 20 minutes. We got a lot of questions in there.
Yes, good. Senator, don't be a stranger. We'll have you back on the show another time.
I will look forward to it.
Thank you so much. That is State Senator John Laird from Senate District 17 with us here. We appreciate all of you going and putting things into the chat, questions into the chat. We always appreciate it. Edgar, when elected leaders are able to come in and talk with our members, get some exclusive one-on-one time. That was good. We got him for 15 minutes. That's good.
Well, you know what? Even more so than him getting the questions again, and I'm probably a broken record at this point, but I'm going to give most of this credit to our members and to how the voice of our administrators is getting across. So many of these pieces that he talked about, more money into the base, focusing to Angela's question on really getting this balance back to getting the job back to teaching and learning, the pieces on attendance. These are all things that, frankly, the members come in talking about. Even before we have to ask them about it or we have to push them to support that. I know the UTK perspective is probably welcome news to our community funded districts, because I know that's been a big priority. So it's just a testament, Naj, of like how great our members have done on like advocating their perspectives. I always say it all the time. I'm sure we have plenty of things that we want them to do different, that we want them to change course, but the voice of our administrators, the voice of our school leaders is being heard. And I think they're doing a real effective job of getting their perspectives heard in the policymaking process.
Yeah, and what was interesting, right before we came on the air, Senator Laird was talking about how he met with our members during Legislative Action Day yesterday or the day before. We also, and I'll refer back to Leg Action Day, right before Senator Connie Leyva came and spoke with us yesterday on day 2 of Legislative Action Days. Our members were meeting with her right before she came on live with us. So you can see the impact that public education and education leaders have when you're able to have those one-on-one conversations with the lawmakers. And that just brings me to talk about Legislative Action Days. And Edgar, I'll have you, give some feedback. Monday, we were on the air starting at 9 o'clock. We had Assembly members Patrick O'Donnell and Kevin McCarty on the show. Yesterday's Legislative Action Day broadcast, still right now on our YouTube platform. You can go ahead and see that. Here's the list that we brought in. Senator Connie Leyva, as I had mentioned, State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond, Brooks Allen, the Education Policy Advisor for Governor Newsom and the Executive Director over at the State Board, Dr. Sohail Sood from Safe Schools for All, Eileen Strauss, former vice president at the State Board, and then Francisco Escobedo from the State Board. They were all with us on day 2 of Legislative Action Days. You can still see that over on our ACSA YouTube, which many of you are already on right now. Go ahead and take a look. The information, Edgar, that we got from that group yesterday, really substantive, really impactful. Just what did you see over these couple of days in talking with lawmakers, even today with Senator Laird, and what our members can continue to do as they advocate this week?
Yeah, I think I said it yesterday or the day before. It's all getting mixed up.
It's all together.
Or last week, who knows? But one of the pieces that I think is that we really drilled on is there's promising news here. Like we're in a situation where there's going to be some revenues. I think some of the pieces that our folks are really thinking about there's this opportunity to make some of those changes. With that said, we can't rest on our laurels. I know we're, again, Edgar, broken record, but that Leg Action Day cannot just be yesterday or the day before or even today or the rest of this week, that this needs to be continued effort. But that was my favorite line, I think, of the last couple of days, where Senator Laird said it off camera, but he said, I've already met with these people like 4 or 5 times, right? Like I'll meet with them and I'm glad, but that goes to show it means that people are taking the charge and building those consistent relationships. It's not that folks are just coming in one day, one time a year, that it's the epitome of this grassroots advocacy. I think Holly said it best, that it's everybody speaking with one voice. Yes, ACSA, our team, and we have a great team. We provide the talking points. We kind of help set the parameters. You folks go in and kind of contextualize it. So I'm excited. Obviously, I'm fired up. Maybe a little too much caffeine after a full week, but I'll go take a nap after this week is done.
Yeah, and you put up with me for these couple of days here. I want to let you guys know, if you're watching the show and you're not a current subscriber on our YouTube page, go ahead and subscribe. Apparently, we are 9 followers away from 2,500. If you have not subscribed yet, go ahead and do it. You will get alerts when we're about to come on with a live broadcast. And of course, you will have the opportunity to sit in the waiting room, if you will, as we get ready to come on the air. So go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube page. Edgar, I do want to just hit on a couple of headlines if we can, and then we'll tell you what's coming up next week on the show, because we have another lawmaker coming in on the show. As we had mentioned Monday, that strike in 8 days that the students had not been in the classroom over at Sac City Unified, that strike came to an end Sunday night, Monday morning, something like that. Edgar, we've said many times that your kids go to school at Sac City, Many of our members of our local community have students over at Sac City. Just give me, what's the litmus test right now? What is the reaction as the kids go back to school? What have you been hearing from parents, obviously your kids, students, administrators? What have you been hearing?
I think to sum it up, relief,
Yeah.
relief, happy that it's over, right? I think obviously when we have a labor management discussion, and these are never easy, and I think the key and what we've seen so much, this is part of the work that ACSA does. I think there probably needs to be some healing, right? There's tensions on both sides. They're able to get to an agreement. I know it's what this community can do to make sure that we're not just keeping kids in school, which is the ultimate goal, but how do we move on from this in the bigger picture, right? There's going to be challenges down the line. What lessons can we learn about getting through that? And just a plug for our services there that, yeah, when folks, because we know that that's a tough part, whether it be on the communications end, on our members getting, their message out to their respective communities, that is a piece that ACSA can help with and has helped a lot of communities. But I think to Sac City is just first and foremost, just happy it was resolved.
Yeah.
Now let's see where we can move from here, really in the best interest of kids.
Yeah, totally agree. I do want to hit one more story, and I think this is important from an ACSA. We're an organization, we're a student advocacy organization. Equity is one of the most important things that we talk about here at ACSA. There was a story this week in the LA Times, and I'm bringing this up because both you and I have had an opportunity to sit down and have discussions with the new superintendent, Alberto Carvalho, over there. The story in the LA Times about chronic absenteeism. The story reports that nearly half of the LA Unified students, more than 200,000, have been chronically absent. Now, for those of you who just want kind of a data point, that means that they've missed at least 9% of the school year. 46%. Data indicates the issue is striking the most vulnerable students very hard. 57% of Black students, 49% of Latino students. And here's the number that really stuck out at me. 68% of the homeless student population in LA Unified experiencing chronic absenteeism this year. Again, we spoke with the new superintendent, Alberto Carvalho. Equity is something that he is primed. He knows a lot about from his work over at Miami-Dade County schools. Edgar, these numbers are concerning, obviously. But even when you dig a little bit further in, that's 68% of the homeless student population. That one, it's a huge number. What does a district, because you've been at LA Unified, you were the governmental relations director there at LA Unified. What are some of the steps that you think need to happen? Do you think at least the first step has to be a broader recognition of the problem?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of unique circumstances in play here, right? And I think we'll have to wait and see what these numbers look like a year from now. Hopefully, as we get further removed from the most challenging parts of this pandemic, are these still issues that we're confronting?
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, we were just talking about it with Senator Laird. There had this been, to say the least, I saw one of our members said, abnormal is the new normal.
Yeah.
Couldn't said it better myself, right? So I think that needs to play a part in our perspective, that think about what we were dealing with, but also think about the public health messaging. What did we tell families, parents? Hey, if in doubt, stay home. We were all saying that, regardless of school or whatnot. If you have the sniffles, you didn't know if it was COVID or not, stay home. That contributed to it.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned, which I think is an important part of this conversation, which are the communities that are being hit the hardest? It's those most in need. So I think that we do need to not just be quick to dismiss this, that there's some systemic issues. There's some community issues. It's the communities that were hit hardest by the pandemic are also the ones that are having other socio-emotional issues, also happen to be, in this case, the ones that are more prone to chronic absenteeism. I think it's just another reminder for something we talk a lot about at ACSA. It's equity, that some of these communities that are most in need sometimes special attention. I think to your point, LA Unified, I can speak from experience there. They have a lot of efforts to get these kids into the classroom. I know one of the things, it's the high profile one, but they have a student recovery day where they'll go and seek out families and try to find these kids. Hey, if you've been missing, what's the situation? How can we help you? Offering them alternatives. So it's never for a lack of effort from our administrators, from our school leaders, from our teachers. And I think this is the conversation that we're having with the state that, hey, we all have a role here. Yes, the schools will continue to try to seek these families out, but also understanding some of the realities that we face. That's why we need some of the flexibility that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Okay, shameless preview for next week, because Edgar
I
always
won't give you a hard time about it anymore.
Come on.
I benefit from it too, so I'm just gonna I'll go along with it.
Coming up next week, live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break. We are here with Senator Dr. Richard Pan. He'll be here to speak with us, talk about legislation inside the Capitol, including his proposals on vaccines. That is coming up next Wednesday, 1 p.m., our live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break with Senator Dr. Richard Pan. Edgar, I know that this is really one of his first opportunities to be able to speak with school administrators about some of his advocacy for vaccinations. It will be an interesting discussion that comes your way next week, 1 p.m., the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Big shout out, Edgar, to our members. We got past that 2,500 mark on the subscribers. You see, you ask and you receive,
You
right?
ask and you receive. You're a master salesman there, Naj. So I appreciate that. And just to look forward to next week, I'm sure there won't be no interest in the vaccine discussion, so
None.
hopefully it's just you and I there. But no, in all seriousness, we've been asking for this. This is something, obviously the landscape has changed. So I'm very curious. I'm very curious about how Dr. Pan sees this moment in time. We heard from Dr. Sood from CDPH, from the California Department of Public Health yesterday about what they foresee. And we actually asked them the question, do we foresee any changes to some of their initiatives, whether it be on vaccines or testing or vaccinating for employees? And they gave an interesting answer. We didn't actually touch on this. He said, no changes for now, right? I'll just put that there. And I'm not alluding to that there is going to be changes, but that will be an interesting piece. I'm curious how Dr. Pan describes the situation with his bill.
Yeah, should be a good discussion. Want to thank all 2,500 and now 2 of you that have subscribed to our YouTube channel. Guaranteed, it's a benefit for subscribing to our YouTube channel. Edgar, good seeing you. I promise I won't talk to you again until next Wednesday.
I'm gonna just avoid your side of the building over there. I'm gonna stay on my side. Give ourselves a break. It's been fun, Naj. Good work by our members.
Yeah.
A lot of gratitude to our folks. They've been out there in force, and it's evident. So they're doing great work on all of our behalfs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are back next week, 1 p.m., live and interactive on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.